Donald Trump announced sweeping tariffs in the Rose Garden on Wednesday afternoon, and within 48 hours, it's been 47, the U.S. economy has shown all kinds of signs of disruption, most notably a historic slide in the stock market, the worst day of trading since the pandemic kicked off in March of 2020. And businesses, small and large, are very worried about what the next few months will bring in the economy, not to mention that economists and economy watchers have now moved into predictions that prices will increase, the economy will fall into recession, and even the dreaded stagflation is a possibility. How does this happen in 48 hours? Where does all this fear come from? I'm going to do a series of videos on tariffs, starting with this one, which is kind of getting into the part one, why are people so freaked out by tariffs? And then I'll talk in subsequent videos about what they're trying to do, whether or not they actually meet that target, and what the long-term consequences can be. So part one, why is everybody freaking out? Well, yeah, the stock market plummeting is always very scary for people, especially if it holds a lot of retirement savings, which it does. But these tariffs haven't gone into effect yet. They've just been announced. Now, he had already previously in the administration announced big tariffs on China, Mexico, and Canada. This added tariffs to 60 new countries, as well as additional tariffs on China. So what is the concern for freakout? Well, the naive kind of two-dimensional view of the world would take all of the people in the US that sell goods and divide them into two types. You've got the good guys who make goods in the United States. They manufacture and make their goods here. They have domestic production. And then you have the bad guys, the people who are importing goods that they sell here. And the point of a tariff is to make that import more expensive so that these bad guys, not supporting US workers and manufacturing, move over into the good camp and start manufacturing here. So in theory, if that was how the world worked, it would just be, pure import businesses that are rattled right now, and we could target them, identify them, and see what's going to happen. Well, even before you get into the absolutely catastrophic mess that tariffs and their retaliation creates, it's important to understand why this even two-dimensional story isn't true. So let's start with the good guys, the people who make products in the United States and sell them in the United States, domestic manufacturers serving the domestic market. Why would they be unhappy with tariffs? Well, for two reasons. One, even if you make a good in the United States, it's not necessarily the case, and is often not the case, that every part of that good is made in the US. So there are lots of cars made in the United States, but any given car can have as many as 30,000 parts. And not all 30,000 of those parts are made in the United States. The car might come off the factory line in Michigan, but there are not 30,000 factories in Michigan that are producing all of the parts that one car producing factory uses. They often buy them from other parts of the country in other parts of the world. When you put an import tax, a tariff, on their supply chain, you're essentially making their production more expensive. And in fact, automakers have said many people are worried about how expensive cars are going to get because of this, because of the number of parts affected in the supply chain. So it's not just if I make a good here, every part of it is American made. You're basically taxing their supply chain, even if the production takes place in the United States. So that's one problem. The second problem is that a lot of companies that sell goods in the United States also sell goods abroad, and how exposed they are to foreign markets makes them very worried about tariffs. Well, you could take wine producers in California. The US market for alcohol is actually declining because people over 60 are drinking more, but people under 60 are drinking less, and they don't consume as much alcohol as older generations, and the domestic market for alcohol has been declining. The foreign market hasn't, and US wine producers have been in recent years trying to make up for falling domestic consumption by selling more abroad. Our three largest trading partners for wine are we export to Canada, the UK, and Japan. Three climates that frankly don't support grapes that well. And they like our California and Oregon and Washington wine. So even though the majority of people, the majority of wine sold by, West Coast vineyards are to Americans. They also sell abroad. And even if it's 5% of their total sales or 10% of their total sales, you are taking a hit at their export market, which is important to their revenue. So even this story of like, well, we just need to have, this is for US producers. So there's a lots of way that tariffs very much hurt their business. So they're freaking out. Okay, well, so now let's go to the bad guys, the importers, the people who don't make goods here but import them. This idea that all you have to do is turn on and turn off tariffs and suddenly they'll switch domestic production doesn't account for the number of goods that the US doesn't make at all. So I was on the WNYC Brian Lear show this morning, and a guy called in to say that he's starting his own board game company, and he's contracted a company in China to make them, and there is no domestic producer of board games. So say he wanted to switch to a US producer. That US producer would have to get financing, get space, buy equipment, hire workers, and set up shop over the next, 2 weeks, 2 months? How long will it take for that manufacturing business to come online to start offering domestic made board games? And question for you, how hard is that to do if the stock market is in decline and people are very worried about uncertainty? And three, do we think that that investment will occur if it's all predicated on a tariff being imposed by someone who is notoriously flip-flopped on tariffs that have been put in place? Am I really going to invest in domestic manufacturing because tariffs are in place if the tariff might go away in a month or 2 months? And will I have put a bunch of money into domestic production only to have it, have been a show for negotiation? You don't. Tariffs typically are the last part of the process. Like first, you find people who want to make board games in the US and then invest in them, and they go to their member of Congress or their president and say, we need protection for this new domestic industry so that we have enough runway guaranteed of domestic market so we can start up. They get all their little ducks in the row, and then tariffs come on at the end, turn down the foreign competition and let the company thrive. So tariffs are typically the last thing you do. If they're the first thing you do, they create so much uncertainty, it's hard to have manufacturing flourish in their wake. That's one problem on like the bad guy side, is that they don't necessarily have alternatives in the US and tariffs aren't creating them and might make their creation difficult. But the other problem is that, kind of like grapes and wine in Canada and the UK, we don't grow everything that we need here. That'll never come back. Like we can maybe grow coffee in Puerto Rico and Hawaii, and I've had coffee while there, but that doesn't mean they're going to make enough coffee for 300 million people. There are some goods, especially food related, that we simply will never be able to make here, and a tariff won't change that. We're basically punishing consumption preferences with no economic gains at the end. So that is why so many people are freaking out. The stock market is falling, and, so many businesses in the US, whether they sell goods made in other countries or sell goods made here, have such exposure to foreign markets and foreign production and foreign taste and preferences and not tariff retaliation, that they are not only facing uncertainty, but it's uncertainty with like a shade of disaster. Man, if they really put in an export market and say that, Canada has to pay double to get a California wine, they are not going to buy as much of our wine, and we're going to lose 5% of our sales or 10% of our sales. That's very hard for a lot of US businesses to be facing this type of prospect. And I have yet to hear from many businesses in the US who say this is going to be great for us. I think I've heard maybe from shrimp. I read an article about shrimp producers who don't want to have competition from Asia, but it's not a chorus of businesses who are really happy about what's happening right now. So that is what happened Wednesday. It is now Friday afternoon. Tariffs go into effect next week, and the prognosis is not good.